I keep on pointing out to you all the time, that there is a split in the Tory party. And fractures of this are starting to show. Now, I actually didn't manage to cover this last week. There were a couple of other things that I felt were more important. However, I still think this deserves to go back and actually have a look at it in terms of analysis. So what is the split that we're talking about? Well, it comes back to that same old thing of austerity and spending. The Conservatives do not like to spend money at all. And in terms of wanting austerity, which is part and parcel of the ideology of the Tory party, is there on display. And it was fully on display during the education catch-up debacle that went on last week. It was almost a blip in the events of pretty much last week, but it happened, and it was quite a serious blip that hasn't gone away. It was merely just wallpapering over the cracks of the absolute canyon that is to probably will engulf the Tory party sooner or later in not only internal spats, but in full-blown civil war. Because, as I've said, there are two big ideas in the Tory party. This idea of global Britain, of we want to be out there, we want no regulations, we want the government not to be involved in any markets, anything like that. The government should have no spending, low tax. That is what we want. That is global Britain. And especially getting the Australian trade deal through this week, that is exactly the direction the Tory party definitely wants to push. The other one, of course, is the quote levelling up agenda. But to do that, you would actually have to spend a serious amount investing in communities in the really deprived regions of this country that do not vote Tory. And the Tories, we have even seen this for over the past decade, do not invest in the places that do not vote Tory. My own hometown, Barnsley, has had its local constituency budget cut by well over 50%. And other Labour seats have had some drastically cut by up to 60, and I think Liverpool was like 60-70% almost. It was very incredibly severe. But of course, austerity was the justification used, and trust me, going forward, austerity is coming. It was pre-built into the last budget. All departments have to have an 8% cut. So before we do jump into this article today, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you for all those people who do support the channel. And on with the show. So, this comes from politics.co.uk. The title is The Education Own Goal Reveals the Tory Split That We Never Talk About. The blows came thick and fast. When the Prime Minister woke up yesterday, he found that not only The Sun, but The Guardian were both savaging him for his failures on school catching up provisions. Generally speaking, if those two papers are cross with you about the same thing, then you've done something seriously wrong. The government has just offered a 1.4 billion in funding, about a tenth of what was recommended. The education advisor, Karen Collins, has also quit in protest. His resignation letter savaged the government's record and accusing it of failing hundreds of thousands of pupils and making commitments that it did not even come close to meeting the scale of the challenge. And there was something of a sense of déjà vu. The government found itself the subject to the same type of headlines over the free school meals, when it tried to resist twice before capitulating in the face of a campaign led by the footballer Marcus Rashford. Even at the time, there seemed to be an unforced error. The Director of Communications has said to the Prime Minister twice, do not pick a fight with Rashford. Dominic Cummings told MPs last week the Prime Minister decided to pick a fight and then surrender twice. In fact, education policy in general has become an unmitigated shambles, from the catastrophe and the inept opening up of schools to the GCSE fiasco, and yet no lessons have still been learnt from either of them. Behind the scenes, Chancellor Rishi Sunak resisted spending the $15 billion recommended by Collins. It's a completely counterproductive form of belt tightening, even if you find the moral principle to actually help these children, predominantly from disadvantaged backgrounds, who have been set back in their learning by the pandemic. Then there is a clear national case to actually spend money, which will pay far off later, and in the form to produce more productive and financially successful citizens. But that is the kind of long-term thinking of which the government is plainly incapable of. Instead, Boris Johnson reportedly went further than Sunak and almost spitefully decided to sign off on just 10% of the required amount. So why? The government is obsessed with popularity, and it's not hard to see how the decision would actually play out. The savaging it got over the free school meals would surely have made it very clear. So why make the same mistake again? The answer takes us far beyond education policy into the very much little discussed Tory split in the new political fault lines. In their hearts, when you get down to it, the old Tory party is still there. It does not really believe in government spending. It wants to rein in borrowing as soon as possible. This instinct has become concealed by the pandemic, which required huge financial incentives like the furlough. It was further hidden by the rhetoric around the levelling up, but it has not gone away. But it is still there, making precisely these sorts of decisions. The new big spending Tory party, which hoovers up former Labour voters in the North towns, has a disturbing voice in its head, reminding it of its former self. And sometimes, when it is quiet and alone and thinks no one else can see, it begins to actually listen to that voice. Whether this voice is spoken out loud, the new Tory alliance shows signs of fracture. After all, retaining spending on disadvantaged school children is not levelling up. It's the precise opposite of the principle of the non-Brexit political goal, which the government is self-set upon of coming into office. Suddenly, Tory ministers and the parliamentary party look as if they have very different priorities from the new red wall voters that they have managed to attract over to them. This is why the government is in scrambles around so desperately for a new culture war. They'll take anything: free speech on university campuses, the National Trust history reports, boats coding the Union Jack, and of course the last night of the proms, as long as it focused the debate on the cultural issues rather than the actual economic ones. It's often a bizarre spectacle. Many of these issues seem so paltry and obscure that you wonder why the government even bothers. They're just like a junkie craving the next culture war hit. Brexit gave them the ultimate high, but they just can't seem to replicate it. And this is the key to why they do it. The culture war must be kept alive, or else political discussion will return to economics. And if it returns to economics, their new electoral coalition suddenly looks a lot more fragile. And I completely agree. I completely agree with that analysis. We've said this, how many times have we said this on the channel? I always say it. There is the two big ideas. And the idea of the old Tory party, which again, pre-Brexit was, we want regulations on one side, which are the more moderate Tories, and then the old style Tories who were full-on Eurosceptics, who didn't want any type of regulation. They wanted full, they took the full free market fundamentalist mindset, is still there. And they are the ones that are championing for this global Britain. Because, it links back to that old imperial nostalgia. It's what they think should work in their ideology. But we are going to see this return. And like I said, they cannot hang on to this forever. Their political alliances, which they've managed to set up in the new red wall seats, are not going to last if it turns out that Boris Johnson has screwed over hundreds of thousands of children forever, permanently almost, by not giving them the money that they so desperately need in the most deprived areas, because not shockingly, that's where the money is needed most, don't end up getting it. And like I say, so much for levelling up. Because if the government were truly committed to a proper levelling up agenda, they would be thinking full on far in the future, and quite frankly, investing in these children's education to make sure that they are able to re-catch up to create more productive financial citizens in the future is not the type of long-term planning and long-term goal setting that the Conservatives are even interested in. So, as always, thank you for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.